You're in a meeting when someone questions your decision. You explain yourself. You justify. You list your reasoning. You walk them through your logic step by step. And when the conversation ends, you feel like you defended yourself well. But what you don't realize is that the moment you explained, you lost. You handed them authority. You stepped into their frame. You became the defendant. They became the judge. Or you're talking to someone you're attracted to. They ask why you did something, why you chose that restaurant. Why did you say that thing last week? And you answer, fully, thoughtfully. You think you're being open and communicative. But what actually happened is you taught them that your decisions require their approval. You showed them that you operate within a framework where they can evaluate you. Or maybe it's subtler. A friend questions your boundary. You don't respond to their text for a day, and they ask why. You explain that you were busy, you were tired, you had things going on. You think you're being considerate, but what you really did was accept the premise that your time and attention are expected and any deviation requires explanation. You turned your autonomy into something you have to defend. This is what most people do. They explain, they justify, they seek approval through transparency, and they think this makes them honest, mature, and emotionally intelligent. But it doesn't. It makes them weak. It makes them controllable. It forces them to operate permanently within someone else's evaluation system. And the worst part is, they were trained to do this, to be helpful and to be polite, trained to make others comfortable and not trained to hold power. Nietzsche understood this. He understood that truth, absolute truth, the kind that exposes how power actually works, makes people profoundly uncomfortable. Not because it's cruel, not because it's untrue, but because it destroys the stories they built to avoid seeing how dominated they really are. Most people don't want the truth. They want comfort. They want to believe their niceness will be rewarded and that their compliance will be respected. Their willingness to explain themselves is an expression of emotional maturity, and when someone shows them it's not, they recoil. They call it manipulation. They call it toxic. They call it dark because accepting it would mean admitting that they've been operating from a position of weakness their entire life. This video will show you 7 psychological reversals, 7 places where what you were taught is good behavior is actually a transfer of power. 7 places where you think you're being mature, but you're really being managed. And most of you will leave before it's over because you'd rather stay comfortable than become dangerous. You'd rather protect your self-image than gain leverage. And that's fine. The herd needs members. But if you stay, you separate. You stop explaining. You stop reacting. You stop handing people the authority to evaluate you. Put your phone face down. Pay attention. Because once you see this, you can't unsee it. And once you stop explaining yourself, people will treat you differently. Not because you're being difficult, but because you stopped being controllable. If this hit you right, I am the strategist once in the comments, just to mark the day your mindset changed. Let's begin. You've been taught that explaining yourself is respectful, that clarity is kindness. That is when someone questions you. The mature response is to walk them through your thought process, to help them understand, to make them comfortable with your decision. And on the surface, this sounds reasonable. But here's what actually happens. When you explain yourself to someone who didn't ask for collaboration, you give them a vote. You turn your decision into something they get to approve or disapprove. You move from author to defendant. And once you're in that position, the frame is set. They are the evaluator. You are the evaluator. It doesn't matter what you say after that. The power structure is already established. Nietzsche called this slave morality. The idea that you need permission, that you need to justify your existence, your choices, and your boundaries to an audience. The master doesn't explain, the master decides, and the decision is the explanation. When you operate as a master, your actions carry their own authority. People don't question you because there's no gap between your decision and your frame. You are the frame. But when you explain, you introduce doubt. You imply that your decision was tentative, that it needed external validation, and people sense that. They feel the gap, and they step into it. You see this everywhere. Someone says something passive-aggressive. You respond by explaining your position. You list your reasons. You try to make them see your side. And they nod. They seem to accept it. But inside they've learned something. They've learned that you need their understanding to feel justified, that you operate within a system where your opinion matters. And now they have leverage, because next time they can withhold that understanding. They can question you again, and you'll explain again, because you've been conditioned to believe that's what communication is. But communication is not explanation. Communication is the transfer of intent, and intent doesn't require justification. It requires clarity. When someone questions your decision and you say nothing, or you say, "That's what I decided," you're not being rude. You're not being closed off. You're refusing to enter their courtroom. You're refusing to accept the premise that they get to evaluate you. And that refusal is where power lives. Think about the last time someone respected you without question. It wasn't because you explained yourself well, it was because you didn't explain yourself at all. Your decision was final, your boundary was clear, and they had no choice but to accept it or leave. That's not cruelty, that's the frame. And the frame is everything. Here's another place you lose without knowing it. Someone disrespects you. They say something cutting, dismissive, something designed to lower your status, and you respond, you defend yourself, you correct them, you explain why they're wrong. You think you're standing up for yourself, but what you're actually doing is reacting, and the reaction is submission. Nietzsche understood that the strong don't react. They don't need to. Reaction implies that the other person's opinion carries weight, that their words created an effect, that you felt the need to correct the record because their judgment mattered. But when you're truly powerful, their judgment is irrelevant. It doesn't land, it doesn't require a response, because you're not operating in a reality where their evaluation of you has authority. When someone insults you and you ignore it, they don't feel powerful, they feel invisible. Because you didn't give them the reaction they wanted. You didn't validate their attack by defending against it. You treated their words like wind, and that creates a deep psychological discomfort in them, because they just learned that they don't have access to you, that their opinion doesn't penetrate, and people fear what they can't affect. But when you defend yourself, you teach them the opposite. You teach them that their words matter, that they can provoke you, that you exist inside a framework where their judgment has to be corrected. And now they have a button, and they'll press it again, because you showed them it works. This doesn't mean you never respond. It means you choose when to respond. And when you do, it's not reactive, it's deliberate. It's from a position of choice, not compulsion. The person who waits 3 days to respond to disrespect and responds calmly and briefly holds more power than the person who fires back immediately with a paragraph, because the first person demonstrated that the disrespect didn't disrupt them. The second person showed that it did, in fact. You've been taught to care what people think, to value feedback, to consider all perspectives. But that's not wisdom, that's crowdsourcing your frame. And when you do that, you lose the ability to hold one. Because now, your reality is negotiable. Your decisions are now up for review. And people sense that. They feel that you're not anchored, that you're looking for external validation, and they use it. Here's a different trap. You think being available makes you valuable. You respond quickly. You show up when people need you. You make yourself useful. And you think this builds connection, loyalty, respect. But it doesn't. It builds expectation. And expectation is the opposite of value. When you're always available, you teach people that your time has no cost, that access to you is guaranteed, that you exist in a category of people who are always there. And people don't respect what's always there. They respect what's scarce. They respect what they have to earn. They respect what they might lose. Nietzsche wrote about the will to power, the idea that all human behavior is driven by the desire to impose one's frame onto reality. And part of that imposition is scarcity. When you are scarce, people have to operate in your frame to access you. They have to meet your terms. They have to respect your time, because if they don't, they lose access. But when you're abundant, when you're always there, they don't have to do anything. You've already given them everything, and now they take it for granted. You see this in relationships. The person who's constantly texting back immediately, always available for plans, and always accommodating, isn't the person who's valued most. They're the person who's taken for granted, because they've made themselves the constant. And constants don't create tension. They don't create desire. They don't create desire. They don't create respect. They create comfort. And comfort is where attraction dies. This applies everywhere. At work, the person who always says yes, who always stays late, who always picks up the slack, is not the person who gets promoted. They're the person who gets used because they've shown that their labor is freely available, that their boundary is flexible, that they can be relied upon to absorb whatever no one else wants to do. And that's not respect. That's exploitation disguised as teamwork. The person who says no, who guards their time, who makes people wait, is the person who gets respected, not because they're difficult, but because they've made access to them a privilege, not a right. And people value what they have to work for. When you make yourself scarce, you're not playing games. You're enforcing value. You're teaching people that your time, your attention, and your presence are resources, not utilities. And resources are finite. Utilities are infinite. People pay for resources. They expect utilities to be free. You need to stop being a utility. Here's where it gets darker. You think your honesty makes you trustworthy. You share your thoughts. You tell people what you're feeling. You're transparent about your intentions. And you think this builds intimacy and respect. But it doesn't. It builds predictability. And predictability is control. When people know exactly how you think, they know how to manage you. They know what to say to get the response they want. They know what buttons to push. They know how to frame situations so you'll react the way they need you to. You think you're being open, but what you're actually doing is giving them your operating manual. And once someone has that, you're no longer dangerous. You're domesticated. Nietzsche despised transparency for this reason. He understood that the powerful are opaque. That mystery creates fear. That's when people don't know what you're thinking. They can't predict you. And when they can't predict you, they can't control you. They have to treat you carefully. They have to respect your boundaries. Because they don't know where the line is. They don't know what will make you withdraw. And that uncertainty keeps them in check. But when you're an open book, there's no uncertainty. There's no danger. You've told them everything. You've mapped out your values, your triggers, your desires. And now they know exactly how to navigate you. They know what you'll tolerate. They know what you'll forgive. They know what you need to hear to stay compliant. And they use that information, not maliciously, necessarily, but because that's how humans operate. We use the information we're given to shape outcomes in our favor. When you stop explaining your feelings, your reasons, your internal state, people have to guess. And when they guess wrong, they lose access. And that fear of losing access is what creates respect, not your honesty, your boundaries, not your transparency, your inscrutability. This doesn't mean you lie. It means you stop giving people the tools to manage you. You stop narrating your internal experience as if their understanding of it is required for it to be valid. You let your actions speak, and when people ask why, you give them nothing, or you give them just enough to make them stop asking. But you never give them the whole map, because the entire map is powerful and you don't hand people power over you for free. You've been taught that collaboration is a strength, that asking for input makes you a good leader, a good partner, a good friend. But collaboration only works between equals, and most of the time you're not dealing with equals. You're dealing with people who are trying to impose their frame onto yours. And when you ask for their input, you're inviting them to do precisely that. When you say, "What do you think I should do?" you're not being humble, you're being weak. You're outsourcing your decision-making. You're telling the other person that you don't trust your own judgment. And they hear that. And once they listen to it, they don't trust your judgment either. Because if you don't, why should they? The powerful decide then inform. They don't ask permission. They don't crowdsource. They choose, and they communicate the choice as fact. And if someone has a problem with it, that's the other person's problem, not theirs. This sounds arrogant. It sounds authoritarian, but it's not. It's clarity. And clarity is the foundation of respect. When you make a decision, and people see that it's final, that it's not up for debate, they stop debating. They accept it and move on. But when you present your decision as tentative, as something you're open to changing based on feedback, people sense the instability and they push. Not because they're bad people, but because instability invites challenge. Certainty discourages it. This is why leaders who ask too many questions lose authority. Why partners who constantly seek reassurance lose attraction. Why friends who always defer lose respect. Because they've made their position negotiable. And when your position is negotiable, people negotiate. And negotiation is a power game. And in that game, the person who needs agreement loses. You need to stop asking. You need to start deciding. And you need to let people adapt to your decisions, not the other way around. Here's the deepest cut. You think people want you to be nice, to be understanding, to be accommodating. And on the surface they do, but beneath that they despise you for it. Because niceness without boundaries is weakness. And people don't respect weakness, they exploit it. When you tolerate disrespect to keep the peace, you're not being mature. You're afraid of conflict, fearful of being disliked, afraid of standing alone. And people feel that fear, and it disgusts them. Not consciously, but deep down they lose respect for you. Because you've shown that you'll compromise yourself to make them comfortable. And no one respects someone who does that. Nietzsche wrote that the herd despises the strong but obeys them, and craves the weak but devours them. This is the paradox. People want you to be nice because it makes you easier to manage. But they respect you when you're not, when you hold your line, when you're willing to let them be uncomfortable, when you prioritize your frame over their feelings. The moment you stop trying to make everyone comfortable, you become uncomfortable to be around. And that discomfort is power. Because now people can't relax around you. They can't take you for granted. They have to meet your standards or lose access. And that fear, that tension, is what creates respect. You spent your life trying to be liked, trying to avoid conflict, and trying to keep people happy, and it's made you invisible. People like you, sure, but they don't respect you. They don't fear losing you. They don't think twice about how they treat you, because you've trained them that you'll always forgive, always understand, always stay. And that's why you're not valued. Not because you're not good enough, but because you're too available, too accommodating, too afraid to let people face the consequences of disrespecting you. When you start enforcing boundaries without explanation, some people will leave, and that's the filter. The ones who left were only there because you were easy to get. The ones who stay respect the frame. And those are the only people worth having in your life anyway. You've been taught that withdrawal is petty, that silence is passive-aggressive, that distance is punishment. But it's not. It's recalibration. When someone violates your boundary and you don't react, don't explain, don't argue, but simply pull back, you're not punishing them. You're teaching them. You're teaching them that access to you is conditional, that disrespect has a cost, and that cost is your presence. Most people never learn this. They think love, friendship, and loyalty mean unconditional availability, but unconditional anything is slavery. Genuine relationships are transactional, not in a cold, calculated way, but in the sense that respect must be mutual, effort must be mutual, value must be mutual. And when it's not, the relationship should adjust. And adjustment means distance. When you pull back without explanation, people panic. They don't know what they did. They don't know how to fix it. And that discomfort forces them to reflect, to guess, to realize that maybe they took you for granted. And that realization is more potent than any conversation you could have, because they arrived at it themselves. You didn't have to explain. You didn't have to argue. You just withdrew, and your absence spoke louder than your words ever could. This is the essence of power. You don't control people by arguing with them. You control them by making them afraid to lose you. And they only fear losing you when you've demonstrated that you're willing to leave. Not as a threat, but as a fact. The moment you stop chasing people, stop explaining yourself, stop trying to make them understand, you become the prize. And the prize doesn't chase. The prize is chased. The prize doesn't explain. The prize simply is. And people either meet the standard or they don't. And if they don't, they lose access. And that's not cruelty, that's consequences. You've been raised in a world that told you power is destructive, that dominance is toxic, that wanting control makes you a narcissist. But that's just the herd protecting itself, because the herd needs compliance. It needs people who follow, who defers, who sacrifice their frame to keep the group comfortable. And it calls that morality. It calls kindness. It's called emotional intelligence. But it's not. It's control. It's a system designed to keep you weak, to keep you manageable, to keep you operating inside someone else's reality. And the moment you step outside that system, the moment you stop explaining, stop seeking approval, stop making yourself endlessly available, the herd calls you selfish, calls you cold, calls you manipulative. And that's how you know you're doing it right. Nietzsche said the snake that cannot shed its skin perishes. And most people are that snake. They cling to the identity they were given, the good person, the helpful person, the understanding person. And that identity strangles them because it's not built for power, it's built for compliance. And compliance feels safe until you realize you spent your entire life being managed by people who were never afraid to lose you. When you shed that skin, when you stop being the person everyone can rely on to fold, you become something else. You become someone people have to consider, someone people have to respect. Some people are afraid of disrespect, and that fear is not cruelty, it's clarity. It's the natural result of having boundaries and enforcing them without apology. This is not about being cold. This is not about being distant for the sake of it. This is about understanding that your attention, your time, and your presence are the most valuable things you have, and you've been giving them away for free to people who never earned them, to people who took them for granted, to people who learned that you'll always be there, no matter how they treat you. And now you're going to stop. You're going to stop explaining yourself. You're going to stop reacting to disrespect. You're going to stop making yourself endlessly available. You're going to stop asking for permission to make decisions. You're going to stop being transparent with people who use that transparency to manage you. And you're going to stop tolerating behavior you don't respect, just to keep the peace. And when you do this, most people will fall away. And that's fine, because they were never yours. They were just there because you made it easy. The people who remain, the people who adapt, the people who respect your boundaries without needing an explanation, those are your people, and there won't be many, but the few will be worth more than the many ever were. Here's your challenge. Pick one person in your life who questions you, manages you, or takes you for granted. The next time they do it, don't explain, don't defend, don't justify. Just withdraw, pull back, and say nothing. Let the silence do the work. Let your absence create discomfort. And watch what happens. Most of you won't do this because it feels wrong. It feels cold. It feels like you're being the villain. And that's because you've been conditioned to believe that maintaining other people's comfort is your responsibility. But it's not. Your responsibility is to keep your frame, and sometimes keeping your frame means making other people uncomfortable. If you got something from this, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more, but don't do it to support me. Do it because you're marking a shift. You're no longer the person who folds. You're no longer the person who explains. You're no longer the person who hands people authority over you. If this hit you, write, "I am the strategist," once in the comments, just to mark the day your mindset changed. You are the frame now. You are the authority. and people will either respect that or remove themselves. Either way, you win, because you stopped playing their game and you started playing yours.